manifestation, I believe that everything absurd and crazy that could be uttered by human beings was uttered in that room. The most wild and lurid conjectures would be posed. The most far-fetched and utterly impossible suggestions would be submitted for consideration. Lash yourselves to the beds, and burn a candle at every door and window, and lie still and wait. Let us crouch and huddle on the dining table, and set a ring of lamps and candles around us on the floor. Push out into the middle of the river on a raft of timber, Jessie mooted. What about climbing into a tree and chain-smoking? Yes, at any other time it would have been as funny as a scene staged by the Marx Brothers, but unfortunately it was only too grim and real, and we knew it, for that strange apprehensiveness, I can think of no other word, still persisted in the air, pressing heavily on our harrowed spirits. That was the way it was in the story that I've come to call
My Bones and My Flute.
It was no ordinary peril that threatened us, but one that was warped and unnatural and sickeningly horrible. A peril from which we seemed to know with a peculiar certainty there would be no slipping out of once we had been overpowered and entrammelled, for ours would be a transducting death. It would be death fraught, paradoxically, with the definiteness of survival, a carrying over of ourselves into forms the very thought of which was so vile that we could not discuss it aloud, but could only let it simmer within our shaking consciousness. We did express it afterwards. But that morning, we each of us were too weak with fear to speculate too far, for we could sense the quality of eternity threatening us as though it might actually have been a wavering, tangible swath of silk that kept brushing our cheeks at intervals, and in some hellishly clairvoyant manner we could even fathom the details of it, the hopeless slavering and gibbering that would become part of our functions, the poisonous shadowed recesses of that buckwater of existence wherein dwelt entities that slouched and wreathed and exuded dank miasmas of putrefaction. You need not ask me how we were able to become so suddenly acute in our perceptions, so unique in our intuitive sensations. All I can say is that we perceived that there was this fearful and stinking pocket of nether life awaiting us, with probably the same psychic power that creates a series of retrospective pictures in the mind of a drowning man. We knew what menaced us. And we could sense, too, that unless we fought with all the fury and bitterness and impassioned determination human will could generate, we might well consider ourselves already as lost creatures who had stumbled off irrevocably into slush and blackness, into some cul-de-sac perhaps, existent amid the unexplored dimensions of our cosmos. By a chance shifting of circumstances and dovetailing of events, the coming of that manuscript into Mr. Nevenson's hands, Mrs. Nevenson's attempt to burn it, our experiments with lighted candles, we had moved within range of forces that had nothing to do with the forces with which men are familiar, and we were about to dodge out of reach of normal laws and be gone forever into a new and slitheringly revolting sphere of intelligence. I know this is very odd language for a person who professes to be rational, but too much of me is back there at Hood de Vries for me to write in a dispassionate spirit. Try as I may, I cannot coax my pen into the restraint of understatement. However, I feel safe at least in the awareness that if I have conveyed a sense of instability and lunacy, even of falseness and unrealness, it is something that I had in the back of my mind wanted to do, for only in this way can I succeed in recapturing here a semblance of the atmosphere of that scene. Eventually, Mr. Nevinson and I did succeed in obtaining some sort of order among us, and after this we were able to marshal our ideas much more coherently. We also did our best to speak in turn and not all together in an excited jabbering. "The first thing we've got to do," I said, "is to run over briefly the incidents of the past few hours and try to get them in perspective." Mrs. Nevinson sighed in exasperation and exclaimed, "Oh, Lord!" But I ignored her and I went on. "I mean, we don't want to rush precipitately into any foolish action, or experiment with something else and then find ourselves further involved." "But I thought you said just a minute ago," Jessie put in, "that our only hope was to try another experiment."
"I'm definitely not agreeing to any more experiments," said her mother. "What's happened should be a lesson to us."
She shuddered and began to look slowly around the room, murmuring,
"My God, what's the matter with the air? It's so alive, and...
She broke off, and none of us tried to ask her to explain what she meant, because we knew. Mr. Nevinson said hastily,
"Nell, I do hope you aren't going to prove difficult. We have to try something daring if we are to escape what's threatening us, and I can't see any help."
"I tell you, I'm not going to be a party to any experiment, Ralph, and I mean that," she said. "Shh! Just a minute, Mrs. Nevy," I said in a conciliatory tone. "This isn't exactly an experiment. Give me a chance to speak. I've been talking it over with Mr. Nevy, and he agrees that it's worth attempting." "Well, let's hear what it is," she said irritably. "And you haven't got to talk like Gibbon's Decline and Fall to tell us what you want to say. Say it simply." I chuckled and I began to speak, but I had hardly uttered more than 4 words when I was interrupted in unexpected fashion. It was the flute. The notes rose from the veranda, seemingly just beyond the windows, clear, leisurely, deliberate. We all heard it. We all exclaimed and then fell silent, listening. Rayburn's lips parted and Mrs. Nevinson's grew rigid. A thumb dug into the hollow formed by her collarbone. This was the first time the two of them were hearing it, in a waking state. For of course Mrs. Nevinson had heard it in her nightmares. On and on it went, the same measure over and over, exactly as it had sounded during the past weeks. Just that, formless and ordinary, but to us who heard it, full of a significance that sent sick tremors through our stomachs. There was no attraction of any sort on this occasion. None of us had the inclination to rush out of the cottage and follow a demon figure. I glanced quickly at Mr. Nevinson, but he reacted like the rest of us and just stood where he was and listened. At the window the candles burned steadily. We could sense no odor. There were no aerial disturbances, only that strange, shifty denseness of air. Abruptly, the flute stopped. We could hear the river bubbling near the bank. It was I who broke the silence. I sighed and said, "Well, that seems to put the veto on my scheme." "How do you mean?" Jessie asked me. "Well," I said, "what I was about to tell you when it began was that we should take advantage of the next manifestation when it occurred, and see if we couldn't follow the flute to where Woman's bones are. If we could have got there before 7 hours have run out and dug up his bones and flute, and had them reburied in the manner he requested, we might still have been able to save the situation." "And why couldn't we still try that?" "Why? Because the manifestation has occurred already, hasn't it? It's quite probably the last one. And look at the time. It's after 2, and 6 hours is the minimum time between manifestations. And we've proved by experience, unless it decided to alter its habits specially for our benefit, which I can't see it doing."
"In any case," said Mrs. Nevinson, "it would have been useless. That manifestation means nothing now.
How do you mean it means nothing now? I asked.
Well, we all heard it, didn't we? And we were none of us urged to rush outside and go after any spectral demon. Even Ralph didn't seem affected, and he was the worst, unless you've forgotten. Why didn't Rayburn have to hold him back? It means that the flute is without any power now. Minerva Woman can't save us. The other things have got us in their grip, thanks to the candles and petrol and what not you and Ralph insisted on experimenting with. She put her hand to her temple, and I could see that she was in a pretty bad state. I don't quite agree, I said cautiously and without any conviction in my voice. It might have helped to lead us to the spot, and I'm certain if we buried the bones and the flute with Christian rites, as the manuscript requested, we would have stood a chance of being rid of these beastly demon things. At least, it would have been worth trying. Anyway, there's no hope of that now. The flute is gone for good. We've only got 6 hours left. Less, in fact. Jessie stared at me, and I saw her eyes beginning to grow watery. I heard Mr. Nevinson's breath. Rayburn's foot lisped along the floor as he changed his posture slightly. Mrs. Nevinson clicked her tongue faintly. And then it began again. The flute, on the veranda, clear, deliberate. This time I acted. I rushed to the window, hopped through, and began to move towards the pantry around the corner, and the notes moved. They preceded me. They were in the kitchen now. I went down the kitchen steps, and the notes descended. They were at the foot of the stairway. When I got to the foot, they were out in the grassy clearing. I began to advance towards the sawmill, but the notes receded behind me, heading for the river. As I followed the flute, I heard Jessie's voice from the veranda, concerned, hysterical. "Milton! Milton, where are you? Come back! Don't follow it! Come back!" I uttered a quavering laugh and, standing where I was, looked up at her. "No, I won't follow it. I'm coming up now, no fear. But I've got the hang of it. We're going to balk our nasty friends, the musky ectoplasms. Wait and see." I spoke idiotically, hardly realizing that the flute was fading on the chilly air. It trailed off towards the river, moved upstream, and then the old silence came down on the moonlit scene once more, oppressive, watching. It was another chilling scene in the story I've come to call
My bones and my flute.